Hi, I'm Scott Rubin, your New York City real estate broker, and this is the Rental Application. I've closed hundreds of rental deals over the years and respect how crazy the process may seem, especially to those coming from outside of New York. Let's go over the rental application process, and hopefully it'll make more sense to you by the end of this video. When applying for a rental in New York City, landlords look for you to earn 40 times the monthly rent. This is the amount landlords feel comfortable with their tenants earning, and it's rare to see anyone ask for more than that. If you don't earn 40 times the monthly rent, there are other alternatives such as using a cosigner or guarantor, but we'll get to that. When applying for a specific apartment, you'll need to fill out an application, which differs by landlord, and you'll need to provide certain documents that the landlord requests. I'm going to go over the most typical documents needed for approval, and I highly recommend getting these documents together before actively looking for apartments. Get them together now. If you find something great, you may want to jump on it quickly, and being prepared is the most important thing. Now, the centerpiece of your application is your letter of employment. This should state your salary, position, and length of employment. If you don't get paid a salary and work on commission or are self-employed, you'll need a letter from your accountant stating the same thing. Next are tax returns, usually the last 2 years and only the first 2 pages. Many people have tax returns that show less than their current income as they earn more now than they used to. For example, if your previous returns show $45,000 and now you earn $100,000, the landlord typically goes by the more current $100,000, so don't worry. However, if you're self-employed and don't have a salary, they'll go by your last year or two's tax returns, since that's the only thing they have to go by. It can be more difficult, but an experienced real estate broker like myself can help you figure that out. Then, there's your most recent bank statement. Typically, you only need the most recent one, but usually they want both checking and savings. It doesn't hurt to include investment accounts if you want to look better on paper, but it's not usually necessary. There isn't a set amount that you need to have in the bank, but it doesn't look great if you're tapped out. Next is your last 2 to 3 consecutive pay stubs. Again, if you're self-employed, you may not have these, so they're okay to negate if that's the case. Photo ID. This one needs no explanation. And that brings us to the credit check. Now, the landlord or broker will run your credit, and they'll typically run a search that includes landlord-tenant screening. Hopefully you haven't been in housing court before, but that's another conversation entirely. So your actual credit score matters to some landlords, but there isn't a specific number that they all go by. When I review credit, I like to think it's more important to see why the score is what it is, instead of just going by a number alone. If your credit has issues, the landlord may be willing to work with you, but they'll likely ask for a larger security deposit. Credit is very important, and if my clients have credit issues, I recommend running a full screening so we can see exactly what those issues are and if any of them can be addressed beforehand. If you do not qualify by earning 40 times the monthly rent, you can usually have a cosigner or guarantor. Now, this is usually a parent or relative who will assume responsibility in the event that you cannot pay your rent. The guarantor usually needs to show around 80 times the monthly rent to qualify, because they need to be able to take care of themselves and your rent in the event that you cannot pay. Typically, guarantors will need to produce the same documents as tenants do, as well as fill out an application and have their credit run. They'll also need to sign a lease and/or guarantor rider that gets attached to the lease. Keep in mind that guarantors are typically used when tenants don't earn 40 times the monthly rent. They may not help you if you have severe credit issues, since landlords don't want to have to resort to going after a guarantor, and bad credit is a big red flag. Landlords also do not always want to work with out-of-state guarantors who may be more difficult to go after. If you do not qualify and cannot produce a guarantor, there may be some other options. Landlords may take a large security deposit in lieu of a guarantor, or the entire year's rent paid in full at the lease signing. This may be the case if you're a college student whose parents live in another country. You cannot have an overseas guarantor, because if you don't pay, the landlord can't go after them. If you do use a guarantor, you, the tenant, will likely be required to produce a letter of employment, or if you're a student, a letter of enrollment. This is so that the landlord knows you're a real person in the apartment who's a productive member of society. So, definitely get all of your documents in order prior to your search. It can get very competitive and you may need to jump on something, so it's always best to be prepared. Assuming you're working with a good real estate broker, they can go over your paperwork beforehand and match you up with landlords that will likely approve you, especially if your application is less than perfect or atypical. As always, feel free to reach out if you'd like any advice or if you'd like to continue this conversation. That's it for now. I'm Scott Rubin, your New York City real estate broker. See you again next time.